was thinking about what it's like to suppress love. and what real feelings are like when you hold them back, or you're not allowed to express them in an organic way. And what that does to somebody, and how no matter how good you are at suppressing your feelings because of your conditioning, the feelings are stronger. The emotions are bigger. And some of us are really good at suppressing our feelings and not feeling, or as some people like to say, they're really good at keeping their TRs in. And what that means and how that's used as a defense mechanism. And what we can control and what we absolutely have to experience. So I'm going to make this personal because it's about me and I'm not going to speak for anyone else. When I was in the Sea Org, and I had been in the Sea Org long enough to be on post, established on post, doing my job competently, I had a phone call that interrupted all of that. And it was, I want to say, pretty sure it was the first time I had heard from my dad since joining the Sea Org and leaving the Concord mission in the San Francisco Bay Area. I got a phone call. And when you get a phone call on the Sea Org, it's not just like, oh, hey, Dylan, the phone's for you. They have to track you down. In Florida, it gets answered by a service or like a main line, and there's somebody, a receptionist, that's their job is to answer the phone, and their stats are to route people where they're supposed to be or do whatever. So to get a hold of where I was, which was blocks away in a building called the West Coast Building, which we refer to as the WB. I was on the third floor of that, and nobody had our numbers in that organization. We were there was a lock on the door with a code, and you didn't give the code out. If you did, you went to the RPF for security violations. So it was something that was, of course, you were never going to do that. Out security is a big deal in the Sea Org. So even getting a hold of me, and the chances of me being in that building were, well, I was there 3 times a day for sure. For morning muster, afternoon muster, and evening muster. But he wouldn't have known that. So anyway, so for me to be in my routine, in my 120-hour-a-week routine, getting my statistics up from the last week and staying in upper conditions, not lower conditions, I was quite shocked and jolted when somebody said, Dylan, there's a phone call for you. And not only because I'm usually and was always referred to at that time as my post title, it was quite interesting. And it was our port captain that actually facilitated that, or it got routed to her, I guess, and then she was able to locate me. So when I picked up the phone, it was my dad, and it's interesting when those memories just cease. And all my memories were filled with Sea Org and full-time devotion to command intention and being an emissary and emulating the Commodore as a messenger and doing and acting and receiving as we think he would have done, or as the messenger advices dictated from senior messengers. So you were indoctrinated into that mindset. So when I heard my dad's voice, a lot of emotions that I had been suppressing were kind of alerted, not acted upon. I had been trained to have way more control over my emotions than just that. I had experienced the death of LRH. Went straight back to post and kept producing. So when my dad called, he was like, Boggy died, who was my great-grandmother and his grandmother. But in our house, or our family, she and my great-grandfather were the ties that bound our family. My grandfather and my dad all lived and supported them. They are the ones that established the resort and golf course, and we had been established in Northern California by that time for since the early 1800s and even late 1700s. So we were definitely a family that had, between both of my great-grandmother's family and my great-grandfather's family, it was quite established. More so with my great-grandmother than my great-grandfather and his parents and stuff. But still, a name where we have towns named after us in Northern California. So when he called and said that she had passed, it was like the funerals coming and this and that. It was like a big deal. And my dad said, you need to come back and be at the funeral. And in the Sea Org, depending where you are, and even in a regular org, a leave of absence is kind of a little bit hard to achieve. And I would say, unless it's going to be what would be referred to as like a PR flap. And in which case, then you're allowed a little more leniency because of the amount of bad PR that would be generated by not doing something. So once I heard, I didn't really feel, I felt a loss, but I was so, as soon as I hung up the phone, I was right back where I was before I answered the phone. And that continued. I wrote a CSW that night, and submitted it to my commanding officer via my deputy commanding officer for internal, via the command lines. And it was I think then the CO, when he got the CSW, called me into his office, and he asked me what's going on, how I was doing. He was one of the more, at that time, people that showed what I would consider integrity, and not just Scientology integrity, and genuine human understanding. And if that indoctrination changed later and he lost some of that, I think that speaks to us all losing some of that. But he was understanding, and he said that it should be fine, but I had to cover my post and I could only go for so long. And they teased the idea of sending somebody with me. But at the same time, it was only like a verbal conversation, and I was ultimately allowed to get on a plane, fly back to California, and go to my great-grandmother, totally unattended. And I remember it was the time that was the big thing. They only wanted me to be able to go for like, I think 4 days or just under a week. And I originally had requested to go for like 10 days to 2 weeks. And so when I got, like, leaving was a big deal, but not really, because I was a dedicated Commodore's messenger at the time. And I honestly didn't really think about, at the time, that I would ever think about not coming back. Like, that would be ridiculous. So I don't know. It's weird because some of the little things I don't really recall. I don't know who paid for the ticket, because I know I didn't. I was making $15 a week at the time. So, I didn't have money, period. But I also remember that not being a consideration for me. Even flying there and flying back, I don't even remember if I like prepped anything to drink or anything. I honestly don't even really remember the plane ride. I do remember the plane ride back, though. So when I got to Northern California again, I was still pretty much in that mindset, and not even a weird, bad mindset, because, like, that's the other thing that I think a lot of people is that my dad, my uncle, my aunt, my grandfather, they would have all been in Scientology, and they were all actively in Scientology, except for my grandfather at that time had kind of distanced himself and focused more on his poetry and art. Then he kind of let it go from the 90s or early 80s, on. But that's also almost date coincident with when my dad and uncle got extra involved. So there was no time when it was like a lull, being like a public. It was sort of always kind of there, or going to, like, my dad and I got a break because he would travel and bring me along, and we'd go on the road for like a few months. So at those little times, we didn't have any like direct org connection. It was just stack rafts. I mean, it was still living the life, but there wasn't the social people around. We were surrounded more by artists at that time. And that was actually kind of refreshing. Like, a lot more love and understanding and smiling and laughter, and, but as a kiddie, I even kind of melded those two together. Like, it was all the same. And, I didn't differentiate per se with that. So when I got back, it was fairly normal, meaning like I didn't really stick out a ton. but I did kind of stick out because the indoctrination was obvious. Although I was also being love bombed by all my Scientology family, saying how proud they are of me, and they didn't really ask a lot of questions, which was kind of interesting. They just love bombed me without any depth. So, and I saw that looking back. At the time, I had no clue. So we had a day where we were all able to just kind of hang out a little bit. And I was, let's see, at this time I was probably 17 maybe. So, we all hung out, ate, whatnot. So I was still a kid, kind of. I guess that's why I said that, was that to the majority of my family and everybody that was there that weren't Scientologists, and even to my family that are Scientologists, they'd never been in the Sea Org. So they really didn't, they still kind of looked at me as a kid as well, a little bit, not as much as the rest of the family, but the rest of the family definitely looked at me like a 17-year-old kid, and just kind of, I think the short story with my family is I was sent away to boarding school, which I don't know how you explain that one when it's like, wow, he's like 20-something. How long is that boarding school? So it was an interesting evening kind of thing with family and extended family, and there was, also looking back, there was a lot of people staring that were like, probably knew what was going on and didn't really get it. So the next day was the funeral, and this is kind of what I started talking about, was like how even in Scientology and the Sea Org, like, you're amazing at suppressing your emotions, and you're amazing at being in control at all times, and not having human emotions and reactions, and not being banky or case on post, or like, that's just it's dev T, it's a distraction, right? Or it's a body somatic. It's all these things that get explained away, so you kind of just keep numbing yourself over and over again. And the more you are involved, the more you do it, but it's so subtle that it's not super duper obvious. And obviously I'm a lot of people are going to be like, duh, that's mind control, that's called conditioning. Right, but I was raised that way. So this was just like another level of this. And it's people are like, hey, how could somebody be so stupid to get involved in some, the nuances are important sometimes. The circumstances are important sometimes, because hindsight is easy to go back and be like, well, that was dumb. Why did you make that? But when you're in the moment and you're without maybe the wherewithal to stop and be analytical, or use intellect instead of emotional reactions, yeah, we make some cruddy decisions. And in Scientology, you're punished for those over and over and reconditioned. And you learn how to do that to yourself. So, we all got dressed and for the funeral, because it's a funeral, everybody dressed nice. And I remember going into the church, and my great-grandparents had never been in Scientology. So it wasn't a Church of Scientology. It was a regular church. And my dad and uncle, like, at that time, those were and my aunt and my uncle's wife, and those were the people that we understood each other. We could look at each other, and it was like, no, we didn't need communication because we're all Scientologists and acting. So we're all sit down, and of course, like, we're the close family, so we sit way up front. And I was like pretty much the same as when I had heard the news until even then, sitting down and, you know, looking at the Bible that's in the pew and kind of seeing what the sequence of events that are going to happen and who's going to speak and all this stuff. And it started, and I was still pretty good. And then all of a sudden, all these emotions just poured out. And I started crying like uncontrollably. I think that experience for me was, I felt like rabid, like I felt out of control. And I think for the rest of the people, I just was a kid crying that loved his great grandmother. And it was really interesting to just feel for a little bit, and to have that be so much that I couldn't, and I was caught off guard. I was caught completely unprepared to deal with that kind of flood of emotions. And I got my TRs in pretty quick. I held it back together, and I went and just stopped feeling in a way that I was trained, in a way that I knew, that felt uncomfortably comfortable, I guess. Because even in that moment, there was so much love and adoration for that person. And the room was so filled with just genuine, pure white energy, like just love in the purest form. And there was no dark energy. There was no anxiousness or shame, or it was vulnerable. It was amazing. And it was hard not to succumb to that. And I think, I don't know, at the time I just felt like it was normal, because my family were and are all artists and musicians and poets, and they're inventors, and I think that it was one of those moments in a tribute to somebody who had just lived an amazing life. And I think suppressing emotions it works and it controls people, but when there's pure emotions, they are unbridled. They can't be controlled, and they shouldn't be controlled. There's no need to do that. I can see why people that grow up in chaotic and controlling environments feel really anxious and uncomfortable when there's just love and acceptance, because that's not what was normalized. That's not what was made you hypervigilant. So that evening, I think we all went and ate and kind of celebrated life. And it was odd to hear as a full-blown Sea Org member messenger, because my ideology was that, like, even this pureness, it was hard to dismiss, but at the same time, like, if they only had the technology to save them, they wouldn't be being all griefy. They could handle that in session, and then they'd truly be free, because, you know, all this is kind of just a consideration. And like I said, for that moment prior, it shattered all that. And then I had to pick up those pieces and sew them back together and try to wear them back to the life that I had been torn away from. So I had another day. The next day was just a regular kind of day, the aftermath of the whole thing. And I think we went in the morning and went to her grave and that, which even at the time it was like, it felt like, oh God, worshiping bodies. Like I wouldn't want to be that low toned. But at the same time, that was a person that loved me and brought me light and brought me love, despite the whole Scientology thing. She was one of the first people that my uncle and dad spotted as PTS and even an SP of the whole family when the PTS SP course was redone and everybody was made to do it in the mid 80s or early 80s. So it's weird. And then, like, I guess at the same time, that was me normalizing my weird ass life and being hyper vigilant and trying to use the tools that were corrosively persuaded into me while they're ripping out the moral fabric that I keep catching glimpses of. And part of that day, I was able to actually go see like one or two of my friends that I had been hanging out with when I got in trouble and got sent to Florida. And it was weird. I was no longer part of a peer group like that, of my age kids. I was now this analytical, judgmental robot in those same clothes. I was like a wolf in sheep's clothing, I guess would be the same, right? And it was totally lost on me at the time and all I could see was judgment, like everything they were doing wrong and what they weren't doing to clear the planet. And I didn't express that, but it was like, it was more disappointment. And it was weird to feel that I was so self-righteous that I could judge people that I liked and were friends. And mind you, we were like 17 years old. They were like a year. So most of them were 18 at the time, I believe. Because I was always the youngest in that group. But it also was like, wow, this could be me. And part of it was like, wow, I could be free. And so I left them and went back to my dad and uncle. I got picked up. I don't even think I had a license at the time. And I didn't dwell on it a lot, but there was something there that was like, am I, like, the world isn't great, but it seems like it's doing okay. You know, like, why couldn't we just help these people? Why do we have to, why is there one way or no way? So when I got on that plane to go back to Clearwater, it was interesting. I knew it kind of felt like a burden a little bit. And it was also, I guess at the time, re-stimulating. I was triggered. The last time I took a plane ride was I was being sent to something that I had no clue what it was, other than it was the Sea Org and it was the right thing to do and it was helping mankind and nobody could do anything more than what I was doing. But I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what to expect. I'd been recruited for a lower org. I was probably going to be trained as an auditor or something in the flag service org. as far as I knew when I was leaving. And so that plane ride was long. It was a long plane ride. And by the time I landed, I kind of had a sense of dread. Like, those 4 days, I was able to eat all I wanted. I was able to sleep. I didn't have battle plans. I didn't have communication. I didn't have to write letters. I didn't have to, like, man missions. It was... And at the time, I felt like, I felt shame because I felt like I was lazy. And I felt like, wow, do I want to be lazy? Am I, like, what are my considerations? Is it because I'm in the world of all the uninformed, all the world oriental gentlemen's, or it's weird when you get back how fast you forget all that. And as part of anything, you there's a routing form when you come back from leave, and part of that is getting a sec check. They ask a bunch of questions, you get an ethics handling. So no matter what, like, you're gonna get found out, and you're gonna either rat yourself out, or you're gonna not tell them and then tell somebody else, and they'll write you up. But it definitely reinstitutes the control immediately. And that was something that at that time I embraced. I felt it, I embraced it, and I believed it was the greater good for the greater number of dynamics. I believed it was what was going to help mankind, and what was going to help get rid of all the craziness and all the death and everything. It was, that purpose is when you think you're working shoulder to shoulder with other people that have the same purpose as you, and you guys are committed to doing whatever it takes to make the world a better place. It's easy to overlook a lot of stuff. It's easy to imbue yourself with a sense of self-righteousness and think that you're most right and everybody else is wrong. And then you embrace people with no will to understand. You embrace them impenetrable. Nobody can get to you. You have all the keys you need. And so nothing will get in. Like in the Sea Org, if you're a good Sea Org member, then you're dedicated to misunderstanding everybody who doesn't understand the tech. And to normalize that for so long is something that is hard to unravel, because I think as humans, we intertwine all these lessons, and there's enough basic truths in that it's hard to unravel and take out the good bits sometimes.